All you.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Dynasty Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Eitan Mosier. I'm here with Sam Stompy Lane. You can find me on Twitter at Eitan Mosier. Go ahead and follow Sam at Stompy the Bear. And today, we've talked so much about the college game and heard so much about the college game and all the guys that are opting out right now and what the implications of that are and if there's really going to be a season. So we enlisted the help of an expert of the college game, Mr. Matt Hicks from Mr. Matt Hicks.
How's it going, guys? I'm excited to be here.
I'm going to go back to that. I was saying Mr. Matt Hicks from, and I wanted you to come in and say where you're from.
I didn't look at your bio on your Twitter feed. So
wow, this hurts. Dynasty Draft Room, boys. Dynasty Draft Room podcast. Dynasty
I just didn't want to say it wrong. I was going to say the TDDR, and I knew that what it was.
No. That's what we use. We use that acronym.
We're going to cut this entire thing out anyway.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are. We have to. Anyway. I refuse to go on with the show if that's where we're at with it.
Where you're not going to know if I'm going to cut it out or not until I put it out. So who cares?
I can also cancel it. I have access to the account.
No, you don't. Matt is one of like a handful of people I trust with Devi, with college. I just don't have the time nor the know-how nor the energy, frankly, to break down film like Matt and John Lobb, your co-host, and Ray and Jordan. Like, you guys break down this film, so I don't have to. And Waldman, that's another one. So I don't have to. So you can tell me what I'm looking at. And I really appreciate that.
And I actually wanted to ask, kind of because of that, what kind of got you into the college game? Was it a lack of maybe some of the knowledge of that on Twitter and other places where people take in football information and trying to be different? Or was it just a sincere love of the college game from like a childhood age that brought you closer and closer to it and kind of got you to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I've always loved college football. I love the NFL. I do. I like it a lot, but I love college football. There's something different about college football. And, I had the pleasure of being able to spend a couple of years at an SEC school. And there is no sports environment like Saturdays in the SEC, man. I've been to English Premier League football. It's awesome. I've been to a dozen MLB baseball stadiums. It's fun. There is nothing like a Saturday in Neyland Stadium. And so I love the college game. It took me a little while writing-wise to really, get into this. I think I started like a lot of folks in redraft content, moved into Dynasty, and I've never gotten more excited creating content than when I'm creating Devi. And I think we're on the verge of this explosion of the Devi game. Folks really, making it a part of fantasy football the way that Dynasty is just a part of fantasy football. So it's this perfect combination of passion and interest and, that I feel like I've done pretty good over the last few years analyzing tape. I got a pretty good track record now, moving into third year, putting out scouting grades and being pretty accurate with guys so far. So it's fun, guys, and it's encouraging.
I joined my first Devi startup this year. It's the patrons of the Devi. I'm going to just forget all three patron.
Are you in Patrons versus the World? You're in Patrons versus the World?
Yes.
It's so hard. There's 48 guys in that league.
Yeah. So it's the Dynasty or Devi draft. God, see, now I'm draft.
See, now you're doing the same thing.
It's not through the website. It's just my guys. It's just my Patreon. It's not even through the website. So you're good.
So there you, but it's okay. So it's Matt Hicks patrons, Ray GQ's patrons, and then who's the other one? Drew's. That's right.
I can't say his last name, but DFS Bean Counter.
There you go.
Poison Shack, isn't it something like that?
So
I'm sorry, Drew, if you're listening.
Those three Patreons started up a Devi league, and I'm in I play in Devi leagues, but they've all been orphans, and now I'm in this Devi league, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't know enough about these people to compete in this. So I'm just like, well, that guy's young enough. Why are you letting me get Tyler Boyd in the 8th round? And it's because you're getting Travis Etienne and Chuba Hubbard. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, I got Najee Harris and stuff, but it's just like you not only have this one like giant league for fantasy football that I mean, I could name you probably 80% of every roster, but then you add in 32 college teams plus junior college plus Division II guys, and it's just like, well, I'm just gonna. That's a name I recognize. I'll take that guy.
It's a never-ending list, man. I'll tell you what. Trying to create rankings and trying to make sure you always have every relevant player. I'm at 331 in my rankings, and I have to create a short list of guys to add in every day just because it never stops. So you could drive yourself like down the rabbit hole, man.
I did have a question for you because I've heard Travis talk about this. I think he's the head of Dynasty content, Devi content at RotoViz. Regardless, if you look up Travis May on Twitter,
Yeah.
He's kind of a name that you'll recognize in Devi, but he's talked about high school kids before. I've heard him talk about high school kids before. And I was like, no, what? So how deep does this really go for you? Do you have to study seniors in high school to stay up to date?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, first and foremost, Travis May, fantastic Devi mind, great college analyst. So all around, big shout out to Travis. I am not currently in a Devi league where you recruit high school kids. That's a little much, all right? And I say that knowing full and well at some point I'm going to get pulled into a league where I have to do that, right? But I know folks who are in these leagues and they're drafting the newest Manning kid who is a sophomore in high school. So you're waiting 3 years of high school plus 3 years of college just for this kid to get drafted and then ends up, with the Jets and gets screwed over like Sam Darnold or something, right? So it's that's a lot, man. But I'll tell you, I'm in another startup right now. Big shout out to Garrett Price and Matt Browning. They put together this crazy league called The Program, and part of it is actually you recruit high school kids in a very similar way that you would recruit in the NCAA football games. It's absolutely insane. And so I'm honestly just still figuring out the rules, but that's the closest I'm going to get to that. And you get pipeline state bonuses, and the kids are assigned different things that they're interested in, and you do the recruiting. So, you could really, take this thing as far as you want. And I guess that's kind of what makes it fun for folks.
I will never, ever, ever make fun of people who play Dungeons and Dragons anymore, because when I look at what we do here and how deep and involved it gets in all the new crazy games that are, that's bananas.
Are you just now admitting to the fact that you might be a nerd, Sam?
I know that. Listen, I am a chemical engineer and a scientist, so I know I'm a nerd.
I just want to let you know if you didn't know.
I am planning on getting a Lord of the Rings leg sleeve at some point. That's my I am a nerd. I get it. But the point is
own it, man. That's great.
When the thing is, when we see it from John Bosch every year, where they just create new formats and stuff. Eitan, we've kind of created our own format in terms of fantasy football with the relegation stuff. There's just so many avenues to take with fantasy football, and that comes with you have an extra source of knowledge that you need to have to compete. And it's just when you get down to the brass tacks of it, it's basically doing data analysis the entire time, and that's about it. And that's about the nerdiest thing you could go to school for, is anything computer science related.
There's so many different flavors of this game that we all love, and I think that you can learn so much from looking at the guys that study Devi, from looking at the guys that are primarily in Dynasty as we are, and also talking to people that are doing redraft or DFS work. All of these things are interconnected, and just having a baseline understanding of kind of what is necessary to succeed in all these different types of leagues and all these different types of formats gets you more familiarized with maybe the format that you're even more focused in. So I think it's always a valuable resource when we're able to bring on guys that have an expertise outside of what we normally focus on a day-to-day basis. But now we're going to actually go into our first point of discussion. We were just talking about some of the big name holdouts before the show, some of the big name opt-outs in terms of the college ranks. Rashad Bateman, Moore is out. Micah Parsons has now said he was out. I'm sure you have even more for me, Matt. Kind of makes sense of all of this for me. What does this mean for these respective teams? And does the absence of these big name players automatically elevate somebody else on that squad to a level that should now make them relevant and make them somebody that you should be looking at and looking to acquire in these types of leagues?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really important is not to take a broad stroke approach here at these players opting out. We need to consider each one of these players' individual situations to know whether or not this is going to help, hurt, hold their Devi value, and then looking at the next guy up. And that's the fun part about college. There's always a next guy up, right? And so first off, if we start with Rondale Moore, because that's the hot one, right? That one, I mean, that broke 4 hours ago, guys, and here we are talking about it. So Rondale Moore decides to opt out. Rondale Moore has 17 college games played, 16 full college games, and he's declaring for the NFL draft. Now, the analytics community is going to swoon over this guy because his breakout age is like 18.8 or something like that, 18.6. So he was young when he put up a 1,200-yard season as a true freshman at Purdue. But that being said, man, I've done his tape review. I've looked at it. There's things to like. He's my wide receiver 3 right now, graded out going into this season, but he decides to opt out coming off of a leg injury. And when he goes to the combine, I'm learning nothing new because I already know he's fast and athletic. So that's a red flag for me. It is, and I think it's going to be a red flag for NFL teams. And I'm not blaming him for opting out. Anybody who wants to opt out, that is your choice. I support that. But I do think right now, Rondale Moore, I just switched his grade in my rankings in terms of NFL projections. I think he's going to slide to a day 2 pick. Now, he was a back-end first-round pick for me anyway, so I thought he was going in that 20 to 32 type range. But I think he could slide into day 2 because we're not going to learn anything new. If he was a player with 16 games of tape and we had athletic concerns, he could prove me wrong at the combine, but we're not going to learn anything new in Indianapolis. So I like Rondale Moore. I still think he's good, but there were some serious red flags. I mean, he's 5'9", 180. Can he play outside, or is he going to be limited in the slot in the NFL? So for Moore specifically, I think he takes a little bit of a hit. Now, next man up at Purdue, David Bell is a guy you need to know about. He balled out once Rondale Moore went down last season. I'm forgetting the exact number. I think he put up between 800 and 1,000 yards and close to 10 touchdowns there with Purdue last season. So David Bell is the next guy up at Purdue, and he is going to get the chance to flash. The guy who takes a little bit of a hit is that quarterback, Jack Plummer. He's a young quarterback, doesn't have a ton of experience there. Remember, he came in and filled in for David Blah or whatever. Like his last name is like blah, blah, whatever. He's the backup for the Lions now. And so he was
It's Bluff.
Bluff? Is it Bluff?
I don't know. There's like 15 ways to say it. Aton will somehow find none of those 15 and create a 16th.
I just remember we had to watch him on Thanksgiving this year.
Yes.
Remember that? Yeah.
And this is just a tangent because this is why I like Kenny Golladay so much, and I think he is a dynasty wide receiver 1, is because Kenny Golladay continued to put up numbers despite Marvin Jones going down, despite Kerryon Johnson going down, and with Jeff Driscoll and David Blau throwing him the ball, somehow he still was able to produce like 3 or 4 wide receiver 1 games. So that's why Kenny Golladay is the best. But tangent over, all you.
Yeah, I was just saying, man, Jack Plummer was almost going to have to be good because he's got David Bell on this one side where he can stretch the field a little bit more, and then he's got Rondale Moore. Now, the last thing I'll say about Rondale Moore, and then I'll stop ranting because I know I'm ranting a little bit, but I get excited about this. The last thing I'll say about Rondale Moore is a lot of his touches were manufactured in college, which is not uncommon. That happens a lot in college, but when you're getting the ball at the line of scrimmage a ton, it throws up a couple red flags. And I don't mean to say only at the line of scrimmage. Now, he runs a fantastic out route. He runs a solid seam route, or a solid slant route, I should say. He works the seam fine. So I don't mean to sound critical to Rondale Moore. He's still a great prospect, but I just want to give a little bit of context because everything else I'm seeing right now on Twitter is first round pick lock, top Devy wide receiver, top 2-3 guys lock. And he could be there, but it's not a lock for me right now.
And that's kind of the thing here. I mean, there's always more to grow. There's always another level to reach in college. Oftentimes, we discount some of the older players that are coming out of college because we say, okay, well, if they were good enough to be drafted, they would have went ahead and declared early. But the guys that stay oftentimes, or the guys that are a little bit older, came from JUCO, came from that type of situation. There's a lot of experience built up in that as well. And oftentimes you see that these guys that are a little bit older when they come out are more polished. So there's just so many different things that you can look at when trying to rate a prospect and see what he might be in the actual pro game. But also, I think one of the main similarities between kind of the different ways of looking at things from a dynasty perspective versus a Devy perspective is there's so many different things that are contextual. You just talked about one, Matt, when you said that touches are manufactured oftentimes for good players on these good teams because there's less of them. So ultimately, the actual workload, the actual ball is concentrated to the players that are going to give that coach and that offense the best chance at being a productive team. There's so many things contextually that you need to worry about when it comes to comparing two different prospects because you even have the conference differences in college. You have perhaps the division differences when you look at FBS players and try to project them to the pro game and so on and so forth. And I think you can kind of get the same thing when looking at some of the situations that you find in the program we talk about often. We often are saying that, okay, well, this guy's production is maybe something you should trust versus this guy's production is fueled because a specific thing happened in this offense. So that's kind of where we're going to take this going now. We're going to try to take away some of the fact from a lot of the fiction that we're getting during this offseason. We're going to talk about some of the contextual cues that you can look at in the program to see if this is somebody that you really want to invest in. So where we're going to start with that is we're going to talk about Darius Slayton and Evan Ingram and kind of compare the two of those. A lot of people are saying that Darius Slayton is a player that we expect to break out this year, that Darius Slayton has every opportunity of even breaking into the wide receiver 24 status and being a solid wide receiver too in that offense. But I think we kind of have a direct corollary to that with Evan Ingram. A lot of this production was in times where everyone else on the squad was injured. It was kind of those contextual cues we were talking about. Targets were manufactured for these types of players in these situations because of what happened surrounding their status on the team. So when looking at Darius Slayton, are you getting maybe some of the types of things that people are saying that might keep you from investing too much in that type of player? Is that a player that you think their production was pretty much manufactured by the situation that they were in?
Yeah, I think with Darius Slayton, he's fine, right? I'm not getting too excited about him, but I've taken him. I've gotten a few different shares of him this offseason, but I'm doing that in like the 10th, 11th, 12th rounds of startups or paying low prices for him. I think what we need to keep in mind is what the Giants offense was working with last season, and it was very little and it was very conservative, right? And so, Darius Slayton was making his fantasy points off of breaking slant routes off to the house because Daniel Jones isn't going to drop bombs downfield, as much as his nickname Danny Dimes might suggest that. But you look at the wide receivers that the Giants have, and there's still just a whole lot of whatever, dude. You got Golden Tate, you got Sterling Shepard, you got Darius Slayton. And although they do some things differently, none of these guys are super exciting. So somebody's got to get the targets, but I got my projections pulled up here, and I have Slayton for 80 targets, and Shepard for 70, and Tate for 60. Like, there's not this big discrepancy between these guys for me. I'm looking here. Darius Slayton I have as wide receiver 41 right now. So he's right there in between Will Fuller and Marvin Jones. And that's my 2020 projection for him, and I would give him a slight bump in Dynasty compared to, some of those guys in that range. So back-end wide receiver 3 for me in Dynasty seems appropriate.
So what about you, Sam? I know that you're not really a huge proponent of Evan Ingram, in fact that you don't really kind of believe as much as a lot of other people would. Is a lot of that fueled because of the notion that when Evan Ingram did produce, when Evan Ingram did have his major season, he was kind of in the same situation that Slayton was in, whereas a lot of the targets were had to be concentrated towards him because of the lack of alternatives on the team?
I think so. I mean, I think that his value is buoyed by that. I mean, it obviously has to be. By the way, I don't like any I'm starting to not like the Giants offense as a whole outside of Saquon. Because first and foremost, like Matt said, it's a bunch of, okay, they're fine. Golden Tate had his days in Detroit, but that was because Matt Stafford was throwing the ball 600 times. You're not going to expect that from Darius Slayton, and I'm sure Joe Judge is going to be far more conservative. And I think that Garrett probably will as well with Daniel Jones. I mean, Daniel Jones looked fine last season. I think he made us all, not look silly, but at the very least, he outproduced what most of us expected from him in year one, and really just probably his career. Let's be realistic there. But I just, there's not, Evan Ingram is probably the most talented pass catcher on that team. And he presents a matchup problem. The issue right now is that Evan Ingram hasn't been healthy the last 2 seasons. He played 11 games in 2018 and only 8 last year. When he's on the field, he's been great. I mean, he had 64 and 68 targets last 2 seasons, 577, 467 yards, 3 touchdowns. The touchdowns I wouldn't look too much into just because those offenses weren't prolific, but he needs to stay on the field. And if he's on the field, I think he'll lead the team in targets. But it's an issue. I mean, he's got a health issue right now, or at least the perceived health issues that he's had. So I like Evan Ingram from a talent standpoint. His availability is something to question. I will say, just on the New York Giants in 2020, Nate Solder, I can never say that name. Solder. He opted out for the season. So Daniel Jones's blindside's not blocked. I mean, we saw what he's left tackle, right?
Yeah, he's left tackle. They might swing Thomas over. I think Thomas is good enough to play left tackle.
Yeah, and he wasn't great to begin with. He was actually one of the big signing disappointments on that team.
That's fair, but let's compare it to what they had the year previous in Eric Flowers. It's something much like the Denver Broncos and Juwan James. Juwan James isn't the best by any stretch of the imagination at right tackle, but he's far better than Elijah Wilkinson. So, but I think that's something that you have to take into account too, is at least one offensive line starter is gone. But while Sterling Shepard is fine, Golden Tate's fine. We'll see what Darius Slayton does. I don't like this offense as a whole, but if Evan Ingram is healthy, I think he would lead the Giants, or will lead the Giants in targets. So I think his ADP right now is probably a little bit high for me, because you know me, I punt tight end and just grab my trusty Jack Doyle. So, but yeah, if he was going a little bit later, which I think he should be, because I think that his injury history needs to be built in, I would definitely be looking at him tight end 8 or 9, 10, 11 around there.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opinion, and you know this about me. I'm always kind of looking at upside and kind of be damned if I miss. I'll kind of take it on the chin, but I'm going to go for winning the championship rather than being in the playoffs. And so I always am looking at players that have that massive upside, like Evan Ingram, because I think, as we all just stated, and where I was kind of getting to with all of this, we're talking about Darius Slayton to begin with, is all the receivers on this team are average. Everyone outside of Evan Ingram and Saquon Barkley are nowhere close to exceptional on that team. So if there's going to be any amount of volume on a team that's probably going to find itself down often and have to put up numbers to come back in the game, I think that is going to go to these two players. So again, I mean, health is something that, you know, we try, but we can't. We're not necessarily as great as we think we are at predicting it. So, I mean, if it comes down to it, I really do think that these guys are guys that you're going to want to put a lot of stock in, just because everything around them is going to be on fire. They're just going to be the dog in the middle of the picture saying, this is fine. That's kind of where we're at with both of these characters. So I wanted to move on to another thing, looking at fact versus fiction. And we've seen this before. We've seen Bruce Arians come out and say that, hey, my lead back is player X, and hey, my lead back is player Y, and hey, my lead back is Ronald Jones. As far back, and you know what, I'm old enough, I'm going to say this, and I hate this when people say it on Twitter, but I'm old enough to remember last year when the same statement was made concerning the same player, Ronald Jones, in that Tampa Bay backfield. I think that there is this disconnect between what people think is important when actually constructing a fantasy roster. If a guy beats ADP by 5 spots and he goes from RB25 and ends up finishing RB20 or RB19 or 18 or whatever that is, it's not worth it. That doesn't help your team win. In fact, all that does is prevent you from starting another guy with possible upside that could have gotten you more and could have done better for you in that situation. I'm going to make this argument for Ronald Jones. I'm going to make this argument for David Montgomery. I'm going to make this argument for all these people that people think are safe assets. I just don't get the allure of it. And in the specific case of Ronald Jones, look, this is deja vu if you're not paying attention. Do you guys have anything to kind of add to that?
Disagree on David Montgomery, just because his ADP has dropped enough where he's basically guaranteed 300 touches this season. There's no risk taking him in like the 5th round because you're gonna get the volume. So whether he
opportunity cost in getting him in the 5th round, you're missing out on a better wide receiver.
I disagree with that
at that spot for me anyway.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but I mean, and by the way, again, not a David Montgomery truther. I was all over the let's fade David Montgomery before the season last season, but I think his value is dropped enough where it's like, I get it. 300, he's going to get 300 touches, so I don't really care. Ronald, I think, Matt, this is one of the things where you and I have disagreed. We generally have agreed a lot this offseason, but I think this is one that we've disagreed on. And I'm not going to try and make an argument with you about these two because I don't know enough about Keyshawn Vaughn to make a good argument. I can't say I'm going to be informed enough for this. But from what I gather from the stats, I mean, the only thing that I have read and seen is that Keyshawn Vaughn is a better pass blocker, which absolutely makes sense. To that you would want to start him with Tom Brady in the backfield, the most him and Phillip Rivers. I don't know who wins in a foot race, but one of the most immobile quarterbacks in the NFL. You need a good pass blocker back there. So that is something that will allow him to Keyshawn Vaughn to see the field. They're just going like right next to each other in ADP at this point. I do agree with Eitan that I don't want anything to do with this backfield.
Yeah, I mean, here's one of I think, and this is legitimately, I don't fault folks for that get caught in this trap, but one of the biggest lessons to learn in fantasy football is that you do not listen to coaches in the offseason. All right. What do you expect the coach to go up there and do? Say that Ronald Jones is trash, sit up there and trash one of his players? And they're not sitting there and giving away the whole damn game plan.
Didn't Dirk Cutter basically do that after they made the pick?
All right. Well, the Denver Broncos are a little different.
No. Dirk Cutter, when he was the Tampa Bay.
I thought you were referencing the verbal abuse that Drew Lock was getting last season from the former coach, right? They flipped him. No.
I haven't even read that. No, I'm talking about Dirk Cutter basically trashing Ronald Jones, their second round pick.
I
think he was on his way out too, but
yeah.
But was he wrong? That's what it comes down to.
I think he was. I think he's a good runner.
He's a good running back, but I think what everyone is kind of getting on a tizzy about right now is the fact that it's been come out and said that he is our lead back. What the point I'm trying to make is, what does our lead back mean? Because you just described, Stompy, the pass blocking issues that they're probably going to have to deal with. They might have to get Keyshawn Vaughn in on those snaps. LaShawn McCoy is also now part of the situation.
Oh, yeah.
If he's a better receiver, then he's going to get in on that as well. If he's not the receiver, then Dario Gubuale, and he's going to be a receiver. So what does lead back mean in this situation versus lead back in a CMC type situation, or in a situation where the majority of touches are going to this running back? I think it's vastly different. And I just think that any bump right now in Ronald Jones' ADP is just kind of just falling for it all over again.
It's a fallacy. There's a handful of lead backs in the NFL, right? If you're getting 65% of volume to 75% of volume, there's probably 5 running backs in the NFL getting that. But I'm looking here. I have Keyshawn Vaughn at 40% on the ground, Ronald Jones at 37%.
Yeah,
so they're going to be splitting volume. And although I will sit here and I will be happy to pound the table and tell you that Keyshawn Vaughn is a more talented player, I can't tell you that this season I'm necessarily investing in either one of these guys. You know what I mean? If in Dynasty it's Keyshawn Vaughn because he's the long-term play, at some point they're going to give up on Ronald Jones, and that's going to be sooner rather than later, right? So it'll be Vaughn's backfield. Stompy's right. He's a better pass blocker, which is going to get him on the field. And it's the only reason I could kind of get behind your David Montgomery argument, right? What's the strongest correlation to fantasy football?
Touches, man.
Touches. Getting on the field. It's simple when it comes down to that, guys. So if you're on the field, you have a better chance of scoring. So that's at the end of the day, the argument that I'll make for Vaughn. That's the short answer. I could give a 20-minute answer why he's a more talented player, but I won't.
Yeah, we'll let you save that for your patrons and the TDDR, because it's not going to make any sense to me. I'm going to go to my grave saying Keyshawn Vaughn is not a better pass catcher than Ronald Jones just because he had the one goddamn season of over 20 plus receptions. Get out of here. But I can't say anything else to the rest of it. You're, like I said, you're one of the handful of people I trust about that stuff. I think the moral of the story here, though, is that you don't really want anything to do with those two at their current ADP because there's no upside. There's no upside to it. So the people you want are either LaShawn McCoy, who's going way late, or Dario Ogunbowale, because he isn't being drafted at all and has a legitimate shot at being the pass catcher for a Tom Brady-led offense.
Well, it comes back to how this conversation started. How do you play fantasy football? You play fantasy football to win the damn league. You don't play it to sneak into the 6th seed of the playoffs and then get your butt kicked by 40 points week 1, right? So absolutely right. You don't hedge your bets. Play big. Go for upside. If you're not chasing upside, you're not playing fantasy football correctly.
And then also to that final point as well, I will say that, yes, volume ultimately is the most closely correlated thing with fantasy points. But also in that, digging into that a little bit more, you also want the right type of volume. You want receptions. You want targets if you're a running back. That's going to help you tremendously. You're going to want touches in the 20, touches in the 5, in the red zone. Those touches are going to be useful. But if you're the guy that is running from the opposing 20 to your team's 20. That's great for you. You're obviously a valued portion of that team, and they want you to do that and to grind out those yards. But if you're looking at the guy that's going to produce fantasy points, it's probably not him. So we don't even know if Ronald Jones is guaranteed the goal line work in Tampa Bay. And I think that just kind of makes this whole argument moot. At least in the case of David Montgomery, that's the case. But then targets come into question. So there's a whole nother thing. Just, yeah, as we were saying, upside is what you want here. So these are the types of guys that maybe you're not necessarily looking to avoid, but you want to be the last guy really that's maybe as a position of need, adding these guys to help you out that way. So let's move on to another story that's kind of going on right now. Earlier in the offseason, probably just a month or two ago, there was a lot of big news coming out from Raiders camp that Henry Ruggs was going to be more of a volume receiver than we thought he was going to be initially, that he wasn't going to be this deep threat and that he wasn't going to be used on bubble screens and all the rest of the stuff that you would kind of give to a guy that you would think maybe is a more of a gimmicky type of play. Now it's kind of shifted to Bryan Edwards. People are going back to him saying he's going to be the legitimate wide receiver one in that offense. He's definitely going to be the X in that offense because I don't think Henry Ruggs can play that position. But I've always been on the Bryan Edwards train. I mean, we're not even going to talk about where he gets kind of into it analytically. His breakout age is obviously ridiculous before his injury. But, I mean, what we've seen from a guy like Bryan Edwards at the NFL level is we kind of get caught in the size speed trap. We see these guys be successful more often than we see guys that are a lot smaller and just a lot less physical be successful early and be peppered with targets early. So, I mean, I'm going to leave the debate to you who watched these guys most recently in college. Is there a discernible difference between the two in terms of who's most suited for what type of role in the NFL that you would really want on your fantasy team?
I love both of these guys. I got to tell you, I was a big fan of both of these guys coming out. And to speak to our point way earlier, right, about the guys that stay in college an extra year, Bryan Edwards was somebody we really wanted to see come out in the 2019 class because we were ready. We had the film and we liked the film. And he decided to come back in 2020, and that was the end of Jake Bentley. Remember, like, the Jake Bentley experiment had been going on forever at South Carolina, and that quarterback situation was a mess. So then they flipped to the true freshman Ryan Hilinski, and although Hilinski did all right, it was Bryan Edwards carrying that offense, playing against SEC defenses week in and week out. And what did we see? Super aggressive, super physical, super good hands with Bryan Edwards and very athletic. Rarely do you see somebody that physical that also can then go ahead and work the end around and then go up and get the contested catch, right? The clip that's ingrained in everybody's mind, much to my distress, is when Bryan Edwards goes up for that touchdown right at the end zone, and it's against the Tennessee Vols, and he just works that corner. All right, he's so good. He's so talented. If Bryan Edwards had not suffered that foot injury, right, while training, he would have been the Denzel Mims, the guy that everyone was getting excited about that they just learned about, because Bryan Edwards is a much better prospect than Denzel Mims, but he's not getting hyped up to that level. So I love Bryan Edwards. I think in this offense, he will take on that X-type role. He's going to have the physicality to play along the boundary in the NFL. He's going to be able to get off of press coverage better in the NFL, and he's going to have those consistent hands. Now, that being said, Henry Ruggs is consistently slandered and underrated by folks who I'm not really sure dig into the tape to the level that they suggest they might, and I know my analytics folks are not going to agree with the Henry Ruggs side of things, but he is so much more than wheels. Like, he has super good hands. He is such a fantastic route runner. This man, even he's a little bit smaller, he runs the post route just as well as anybody in this class, maybe other than Jerry Jeudy. And what he does not get enough credit for, he caught one touchdown. I believe it was for every 7 receptions. And they were not just him breaking them to the house. Now, he can break a slant to the house, but he was catching balls off the seam, into the end zone. He was working that back corner of the end zone, going up over guys. He's a much, much more well-rounded guy than most folks give him credit for. So I think it came out today, right, that he's probably going to play in the slot. Listen, they're going to move Henry Ruggs all over the field. They're going to move Bryan Edwards all over the field. Lynn Bowden, Roto World came out 2 days ago and said Lynn Bowden is going to take snaps at quarterback. Guys, I'm not trying to get in John Gruden's mind. That's a dark place, man. And it's going to be crazy in there. And I'm not trying to be a part of that. But here's what I know. Bryan Edwards is talented. Henry Ruggs is talented. And they are both going in rookie drafts. I know rookie draft season is pretty much over, but they both went for cheaper than they should have. And they're both going to be players that we're scrambling to buy next year, like folks are scrambling to buy Terry McLaurin this year.
The issue is, I think I'm talking as I'm gathering my thoughts. I apologize. So I won't ever invest in rookie wide receiver. Like, literally will not do that. Just won't do it, because the chances that they hit in year one are pretty small. I think it's like 8% of breakouts occur in year one for wide receivers. 29% year two, 27% year three. This is from Peter Howard's analysis. So that's why even guys like CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, who are fairly sure things in the NFL, I'm still not doing it, because you still have N'Keal Harry-esque seasons where N'Keal Harry dealt with, I believe, ligament issues in his ankle. Is that right? I can't remember now. I thought he had an ankle.
It was lower body. I'm
pretty sure it was ankle energy. But anyway, so he didn't get a lot of practice time with Tom Brady. Tom Brady's notorious not throwing to rookie wide receivers because he just doesn't trust them. So
very many good ones.
Well, that's true. But N'Keal Harry, with his college profile and his draft pedigree or his draft capital, is bound to, maybe not bound to, but he is more likely to hit than anybody else in that draft. But he had a bad year last year. That doesn't mean sell on him, but that means buy him because his value is depressed. That means buy Paris Campbell because his value is depressed. Preston Williams, Deontay Johnson's is climbing a bit, so he's not a great example. Miles Boykin's another one that a lot of people forget. And that's why Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs as rookies with mediocre quarterback at best, it's what are the chances that they actually have a decent year with Derek Carr or Marcus Mariota? Probably pretty small. One of them might, but I think it's going to be another Darren Waller season personally. So that for me is why I wouldn't invest on either one of them. But I did have a question on Ruggs because, we saw DJ Shark do nothing his rookie season. He didn't have a great college profile because they weren't a passing team under Les Miles. And then all of a sudden he exploded onto the scene last year. Is that what you saw on tape? And is Henry Ruggs kind of a maybe better version than that, where we actually saw decent production despite or at least compared to DJ Chark?
Yeah, we saw, at least I'll speak for myself, I saw a lot more on tape with Henry Ruggs compared to DJ Chark. And he just didn't – it's exactly what you said. He was limited in that Ed O offense before Joe Brady came into town. And the thing about what Ed O was doing there with LSU is he was changing up that offense every year because he could not figure out what he wanted to do with it. And so I think that was a real tough situation for Chark to really show anything. And Henry Ruggs, though, like I said earlier, I was able to see a lot from him. And I saw versatility. I saw the ability to be a good route runner in addition to the speed. So although the speed is exciting, it's not the end-all, be-all of why he got drafted as the first wide receiver off the board, which, again, did not surprise me. I saw the Raiders making that move from 3 weeks away. It did not. And when he was in that bathrobe, man, when he got drafted, I said he knew he was going to Vegas. But but Chark, I think did get drafted purely on the athleticism and on the speed, but it just happened to be a part of Ruggs' game.
By the way, I hate you now for this because now I have to reconsider my thoughts on Ruggs, and I'm just like, oh, fine. God damn it. You guys know more than me, so whatever.
So that's actually what I was going to kind of go into. So everybody expects Edwards to be the X on that team, and historically, I mean, generally, most of the time, up until recently, we've seen that X being the one that's peppered with targets and leading that team in targets. But if you think that Henry Ruggs has a wider skill set than most people believe, and he's slated for that slot role with the way that Derek Carr and Marcus Mariota have been relatively conservative quarterbacks throughout their entire careers, do you think that there's a chance that Z is actually the most peppered with targets and the most volume-filled role in year one in that offense?
Yeah, and my targets for this season, so I did do out projections for every team, and in my targets, I have 84 targets for Henry Ruggs, and then next up is Darren Waller with 78, and then actually 78 for Bryan Edwards as well. I have them both with 15% of that market share. So, I do see Henry Ruggs as getting the most, and again, because I think he's going to be used in a lot of ways, there will be some manufactured touches that go in on top of that, as well, and I think they'll bump him outside, they'll play him inside. We're going to see him used in a variety of ways. And the other thing that's important to keep in mind is John Gruden was out of the game for 10 years, and we haven't really figured – I know I joked about it earlier, but we haven't really figured out what his style is. And based on the way he was drafting, he gave us no hints. So, I kind of – when I did my projections, I tried to follow the talent, and that was, kind of just the route that I went down, because I think other than that, you're really just guessing.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that as well. So let's switch over to another often discussed topic that we've been hearing a lot of over the past couple of days. Obviously, things are changing out in Florida with the Miami Dolphins. We're just seeing a lot of these people, or a lot of the receivers on that team, beginning to opt out because of the coronavirus concern, and because of that, a lot of these other guys are going to be propped up in that. Obviously, Stompy, I know you're one of the main supporters of Preston Williams, but you've also kind of fallen because of the Wilson holdout as well. So, I mean, this is kind of a situation where it seems that there are going to be two guys in that offense to really hold their market share and really be valued pieces moving into the 2020 season. A lot of slander has gone Mike Gesicki's way. A lot of people are saying he's athletic, but he doesn't play like he's athletic. We haven't seen anything from Mike Gesicki. My response to that is I don't really understand where that's coming from, because I mean, generally we don't see a lot from tight ends in the first couple of seasons. And if you compare his career and his yards per target with a lot of the contemporaries at that position, what you find is he has some historically good comps. He has the Vernon Davis comp. He has the Greg Olsen comp, of all of these guys that took a couple years to actually find their feet in the league. So I'm going to go ahead and let Stompy talk about Wilson, because I know he wants to. But after we do that, we can get back into where we're going with Mike Gesicki and Devontae Parker on that offense.
No, it's more like the only thing I can think about is the end of not the Clone Wars. What's the third? The Revenge of the Sith or whatever, where Darth Vader finds out that Padme's dead, and he goes, "No!" That's how I fit. I mean, that Jeff was just running through my mind all day yesterday. I still love Albert Wilson. He's had some bad luck with injuries. I still feel that he could have been a legitimate wide receiver given a chance in the NFL. Good night, sweet prince. I mean, you're not dead, but I'm letting you go. I love you, but I'm still letting you go. In terms of Devontae Parker and Preston Williams, I can't get on board with Devontae Parker, because I was a Devontae Parker person for 3 years, and then he didn't do anything, and then he got out from under Adam Gase, and I'm like, oh well, this sucks. But Preston Williams, like you mentioned, I am all over Preston Williams. That guy started his career off fantastically before the ACL injury. And like Eitan said, it's a fairly funneled offense to those three guys. It's going to be Parker, it's going to be Williams, and it's going to be Gesicki. And then Matt Breida might get in there every once in a while, but I'm not going to bank on anything coming from Breida or Howard for that matter. So Preston Williams has a legit shot to actually have a second-year breakout here because he's going to be on the field all of the time because he's one of the two wide receivers, starting wide receivers. So he's going to get plenty of targets. He had an elite season at Colorado State his last season. He's extremely talented and athletic, and it just the only reason he dropped into, I believe, the 7th round is because of off-field issues. Didn't have any issues last season, so I'm all aboard Preston Williams, especially at his value right now.
I will say, I felt it with Albert Wilson too. I'm a big Albert Wilson truther, man. He was always on my best ball teams because he'll just throw up some big weeks like out of nowhere, and he seemed to do it in Kansas City all the time. And I was excited for Albert Wilson to see, like not like crazy excited, right? But I mean, I definitely have him stashed in a lot of places. I think one of the things that I keep coming back to with Miami is that we have a fully healthy Tua participating in training camp. And it seems like when I did my initial projections, I split Fitz, Magic, and Tua 8 games because I felt like, that was going to be about the point. I think Tua might take over a little bit quicker here. And if Tua is in, what that means for the wide receivers, so it almost sounds backwards, but although Tua, I'm very excited for him to get out on the field, he is not going to physically throw the ball as much or as just like huck it, chuck it football as Fitzmagic, right? So it actually, I think, depreciates the values of the wide receivers to a certain point. So I'd get less excited about Devonta Parker. I'd get less excited about Preston Williams if Tua is playing. Even though I love Tua, he's my QB1 in the class. He's a fantastic quarterback, and he's going to be – it's just going to be a different offense there. They're going to push the ball less downfield. The touchdowns are going to drop a little bit. Although we might see the targets, or not the targets, the receptions increase because those balls are going to be on point for them. So I'm still on the Devonta Parker game. I'm not really backing off of him, but I'm also not going like all in on him. Like I'm not trading for him everywhere, but he projects out well, and it's hard for me to finesse the numbers for him not to.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at with Devonta Parker versus Preston Williams. I love Preston Williams. I do think that he can definitely be something in this league as well, and he had a good showing before he got injured. But, I mean, I'm going to lean toward experience in terms of looking at a guy that at least has maybe not always been a star in the league, but has the experience of being under different coaching staffs, of having to do things a little bit differently, of being one of those players that was doubted early in his career and kind of making it through that. So I do think that it's going to be a funnel offense, but I think it's going to be one of those receivers. And alternatively, because of what you just said, if Tua takes over, and I think Tua is going to take over, I think it's going to be the shorter target, and that's for me going to be Mike Gesicki. I think he's incredibly athletic. He's essentially going to play slot because the competition for him to play slot was Albert Wilson and was Hearns, and they're not necessarily going to be a part of what Miami is going to do this year. So I really do think that Mike Gesicki is within a shout of being one of the most athletic tight ends in the league, with now one of the most assured and one of the most easy to project target shares in the league, looking at close to 100 targets. So I just think that that's a really, really good environment for a breakout tight end that maybe might not have had this opportunity before, in the same way that Evan Ingram profited from having a lot of the guys around him in that offense gone. I think it's kind of the same thing, even though Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson aren't probably the same in terms of comparables to their respective positions on that team. All right, so that is going to be the end of our discussion today. We're going to get into what everybody is here for, and we're going to plug in the analyzer and get to this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. So let me go ahead and shout out what the diagnostic is this week. And what I got is a long paragraph from Omar Doze. Follow him on Twitter. He sent in this roster I don't think it's a super flex roster because there's only one quarterback on the team. It's Lamar Jackson at quarterback. At running back, it's Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, Devin Singletary, Darwin Thompson. Wide receivers, Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp, Adam Thielen, Deebo Samuel, DJ Chark, and Darius Slayton. And at tight end is Hunter Henry and Irv Smith Jr. So let's.
By the way, it is a super flex roster. If you read the paragraph, he says, last year I entered my first Dynasty super flex league, 12-man league, tight end premium. At the time, I didn't understand how important having a second QB in super flex was. So I drafted with a late QB strategy. Good for you for getting Lamar Jackson. I hope you listened to me about that.
Got it. Thank you for the paragraph as well, although just settings would be just.
And he's got the 1.12 in this year's draft.
But hold on. There's some good imagery in this paragraph. Like, there's a really good metaphor in here. Like, I appreciate this.
All right, so we're gonna read it now because Matt decided to point that out. Then I began to see all the QBs going off the board quickly. In the 6th round, I took a high upside QB in Lamar Jackson. Yes, you did. Yes, I've been taking victory laps for months. Me too. By my playoff time, I added Eli Manning to help fill in some weeks. Ugh. What? Ew. My roster should inform you that I hoisted the championship trophy. Yes, you did. And me and Matt are going to have a lot of fun with these running backs. I'm just going to say that right now. Now that the draft has passed and everyone has landing spots, I have some ideas, but I would love to hear what you guys think I should consider. I believe I'm driving an Aston Martin now, but how can I make it a Bugatti? This guy knows more about cars than we do.
Aston Martin DB9. I'm taking over any Bugatti. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm crazy about that, but I like the James Bond car. Is nobody with me with that? Really?
I don't know what we're talking about. So
I drive a Ford Focus.
I blacked out.
Yeah, I have a Honda Accord, so I understand where everyone's coming from. But how can we take this and make it even better? So, yeah, this is one of those opportunities where we're working with a really stacked team, if you didn't get the implication there. But, again, at QB, it's just Lamar Jackson. So something's going to have to be done with this team. Looking at the next thing that we can go to, looking at running backs, it's Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, Devin Singletary, Darwin Thompson. I think with the drafting of Zach Moss, Devin Singletary's value isn't necessarily where that should be. Darwin Thompson could potentially be something, but there's also DeAndre Washington, I believe, in that backfield that probably is going to have, to me, the same role that Damian Williams might have had in that offense behind CEH, if that's the way that you see it playing out. And then you have, obviously, Alvin Kamara, who really has no competition in his backfield. Nick Chubb, who has no real competition for touches on the ground. His backfield has some competition for receptions in Kareem Hunt. And Kareem Hunt's also one of those backs that you might be able to pick up that might be a league winner in the event that Nick Chubb goes down. But other than that, again, you have one quarterback here, so you're going to have to take a piece from either the running back group or the wide receiver group or both. Where are you guys starting in terms of the running back group? Do you think you have enough depth to get away with trading somebody that's actually going to get you a decent return? Do you think you need to stay where you're at with that, and we can move on to the wide receiver group and then make the decision at that point?
This is going to hurt me on the inside and out because I'm going to cry. You need to trade Alvin Kamara. Listen, I love Alvin Kamara. We know I love Alvin Kamara. In fact, if you're not watching, but I have a Alvin Kamara and I have a mini helmet signed by Alvin Kamara. I have a picture signed by, or not signed, but just framed. Anyway, I love Alvin Kamara, but he's I think he's the oldest one. Maybe not. It might have been Austin Eckler, but the point is Kamara has more miles on his legs, or more touches on his legs. He's in the third year of a 4-year contract. He's probably at his peak value at this point, and he's held it for 3 seasons now. Nick Chubb has some questions surrounding him about Kareem Hunt. Austin Eckler has some questions about overall touches, so their values aren't nearly as high as Alvin Kamara. In order for you to get a quarterback, like if you're not going to have 3 quarterbacks, you better have 2 studs at quarterback. And I would be trading Alvin Kamara to try and get one of those studs. Who you can get, you might be able to get somebody like Carson Wentz and then a lesser running back in return, really, if I think about it. Alvin Kamara is kind of in a weird space where it's like there's like a tier of 4 or 5 quarterbacks who are probably more valuable than Alvin Kamara in Superflex, and that includes obviously the big 2 in Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, Dak, Deshaun Watson, and you could say Kyler Murray's climbing up in there, so you might be able to get Russell Wilson too for Kamara. So that's not a bad trade-off for me either. Either way, you are 5 deep right now. If you sell a guy, you're 4 deep at running back, which is plenty. So I would be trading Alvin Kamara and maybe even sweeten a deal and add that 1.1 or that 1.12 draft pick and get somebody like Deshaun Watson or Dak. Then you have a continue to be elite roster, but you just upgraded one of your weekly starters.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it as well. I mean, I think that you have enough to be deep enough here. And then with the whole COVID-19 thing and how that is going to affect the season, I think that we're going to see more of these handcuff running backs, more of these guys that you kind of took a flyer on in the late rounds, get some opportunities during the course of the season, whether it's for a week here, a week there, so on and so forth, because not only are these guys, along with tight ends, one of the most injured positions in the NFL, we're just going to see more people in the NFL as a whole just have these weeks where they're not playing because of coronavirus or because of a quarantine here and there. So I think that we're going to see a situation where you might be able to even make up some of that depth later on in the season by grabbing 1 or 2 of these backs that pop out that might be a little bit more numerous this season than you've seen in seasons past. What about you, Matt? What do you think about this running back group? Are you keeping it as is and changing the wide receivers, or do you think this is a situation where you kind of need to just take one for the team, sell one of these guys, get yourself set at QB and kind of move on from there?
Yeah, the wide receivers are all holds for me because I think they're guys who actually have a ton of value and are really good, but the perception is not there, right? And when I'm trading, I'm thinking about perception. I'm trying to think about who other people like that I don't. And this is going to be a weird transition, but I originally was going to go for Alvin Kamara. And so I'm glad Stompy brought him up. I love Alvin Kamara. I'm a Tennessee Vol. I got to see him play live in college, so I'm up there with you, Stompy, in terms of just being an absolute fan for him. But you can flip that value, and you could get a quarterback. And I think if you can get Russ Wilson and anything back for Alvin Kamara, you're in a good spot in Superflex. But so I'll give another suggestion because I want to, give him another option here. I would say we flip Devin Singletary, right? And we add a rookie pick onto that. So let's package Devin Singletary with maybe a 2nd-round rookie pick, and let's get a borderline QB1 add to that. So, Stompy,
get Drew Lock. Drew Lock.
That's where I was going, Stompy. You add Drew Lock. Or let me give you another one that's not quite as sexy, but I bet you could get this deal done. Devin Singletary and a 3rd for Ryan Tannehill. It's not sexy, but it'll get the job done. You might even be able to flip Devin Singletary for Ryan Tannehill straight up.
Yeah, I was going to say that. But, you can add one. He has the last pick in the 1st round. I don't think you're going to get a ton there. You can get one of those wide receivers. But you're pretty deep at wide receiver too. So if anything, if you can – Devin Singletary and let's say 1.12 for Carson Wentz. You not a Carson Wentz fan? Are you rolling your eyes at me?
No, that was me trying to think. Stompy, I'm going to be honest. We were talking about the patrons versus the World League before. I was on the clock. I just made a pick while we were working through that.
Well, who'd you pick?
I took Kenyon Drake in the 9th round.
Yeah. Oh my God. What? Jesus.
In the 9th round.
But I didn't even think about that because depending on who you're trying to trade with, Devin Singletary has some sneaky value where
I don't think you're getting any value from a guy after the Zach Moss.
You shouldn't
draft.
be.
You shouldn't be.
You're absolutely right. But let me tell you, there is at least one man in your league that will pay for Devin Singletary. It does not matter what league you are in.
He's the contrarian that is like, no, Devin Singletary is going to lead the backfield in touches. So but that's the thing is you sell Devin Singletary in that 1.12 to somebody who doesn't necessarily believe in Drew Lock or is more down on Drew Lock. You have the stable upside of Lamar Jackson, and you have like top 5 upside. We're not going to argue about this, but in my opinion, top 5 upside of Drew Lock in that offense.
I think you have Matt Ryan upside. I think that's what it's called, because it's not even necessarily that you believe that the player is that great himself. He's just been surrounded by so much talent that eventually it's going to come out heads.
I think Lock's arm talent is second to only Patrick Mahomes in the NFL right now.
Okay.
I'll give you top 5. Here's another quarterback that fits into the range, right? And one that folks are low on. I think too low on because of last year's performance, Jared Goff.
Yep.
I think you could flip Singletary in that 112 or just Singletary in the 112 for Jared Goff.
You might be able to just flip.
I don't think you're getting the years. I don't think you're getting the years out of Jared Goff. I mean, you can look at his contract and you can say that, okay, well, you're safe for 3 or 4 seasons because of the dead cap on his contract if you look at it. But I think in about 4 years, in about 3 at the end of the 2023 season, I believe, you have a situation where the team actually saves money by getting away from Jared Goff. And this isn't to really crap on Goff. This is just saying, if you're looking at a quarterback who's probably going to be a starter for, the rest of his career for the foreseeable future, somebody that you're really looking to invest in, like for me, a Carson Wentz.
Jalen Hurts is going to surprise everybody.
Oh my God!
Shock the world, baby.
But Jared Goff versus a Carson Wentz, I think there's so much more risk and so much uncertainty in Jared Goff versus Carson Wentz that I would be willing to kind of go the other way on that completely, just because of kind of what we've seen from Jared Goff in a great situation with great players all around him on the field. We've seen low-end QB1 production, and that kind of gets us eventually having a guy get usurped by someone else on that roster.
Well, so I think this is a good point of discussion that always needs to be talked about, is what we're looking at in terms of dynasty. I understand that we're looking for guys that have high or the potential to be on your rosters for years, but I think as an overall strategy, you should only be looking 2 to 3 years out. So if you're going to have Goff as a starter for 2, 3, 4 years, and with the amount of roster turnover that you should be having every couple of seasons in Dynasty, Goff is not as much of a risk when you take a look at it that way, right? I mean,
I would agree with that, but I would also add that I would say that matters to me so much more at every position other than quarterback. Because quarterback to me in a superplex is that one position that you really want to set and forget for a long time. Like, I'm not the guy that is, drafting and relying on Ben Roethlisberger on my, like, it's just not something that I'm really looking to do, because I know that if I'm going to have to buy one later, I'm going to have to spend a premium. I'm going to have to trade another Alvin Kamara. So to prevent myself from doing that, I might as well get someone who at least has a little bit, I don't know. Who has
that's fair, but let's look at how the quarterback position ages in the NFL, right? I mean, Matt Stafford, I think he's going to be 33, maybe 34 this year. It will just put up arguably his best statistical season on a per game basis. Matt Ryan just finished as a top whatever. I mean, the quarterback position ages extremely well, so you can have 2 or 3 years from a middle-aged quarterback and you're fine. I agree. Yes, you want longevity at that position, sure, but as your QB2 when you have Lamar Jackson, I'm not so sure that I'm concerned about that. I want that one solid guy that's like, yeah, I'm going to build my team around this guy, but I can rotate those quarterbacks as I go.
I can get with that. I would just also add that it does look like that safety, though, that we had with the quarterbacks might be beginning to fade a little bit. I think teams are a little bit more or less hesitant to stick with these really, really high-paid starters that aren't necessarily not necessarily world beaters on their teams for a little bit longer. I mean, Aaron Rodgers just had a quarterback drafted behind him, which was something that nobody would have seen coming 3 or 4 years ago. Like, it was unheard of to have a guy that, yes, maybe he's 32 years old, but he's probably still a top 10, top 12 quarterback, however way you look at it, kind of be challenged. And I think we're seeing that more often these years. We're seeing teams be less reticent to go ahead and just call a spade and move on from these guys when it comes down to it. What do you think on that, Matt?
Yeah. Sorry, can you run that back real quick? I cut out there for a second.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think that we've gotten to a point where teams are a little bit more, they're a little bit more concerned with making sure that the dollar they're spending on these high-priced quarterbacks really makes sense for that team. So they're more willing to walk away from guys that just a few years ago would have had pretty much jobs for their entire careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, like Kyler Murray is the biggest example of that. But we're seeing this dynamic in the NFL right now where GMs and head coaches don't last, right? And so these guys aren't necessarily, in a lot of cases, as invested in the 10 or 15-year outlook of the team, which is how long these QBs used to hang around an NFL team, right? So instead, they're worried about being able to have a job next year, which is somehow why Bill O'Brien keeps, hanging around, because he does just enough to screw his team over in the long run, but get him into the playoffs for another year. So I think you need to keep that in mind. The quarterback position is more volatile in and of itself than necessarily before. But the other thing I will say on the flip side of that is we're seeing, even when the team does finally give up on the quarterback, that these quarterbacks that earn a starting job in the NFL, they don't go away, right? So Ryan Tannehill, he ended up going to Tennessee and he found his way back into a starting role and got paid. Marcus Mariota, do not be surprised if Marcus Mariota is not starting for the Raiders at some point this season. If things go south early, they're going to give him the shot to be the starter again. Even a guy like Case Keenum, who at one point in his career tastes a little starter, he gets passed around to different NFL teams, and he's a spot starter in different situations. So as much as you're right, like that idea of them being that franchise quarterback through the thick and thin, that's probably gone. But these guys end up being journeymen, and they find their way back to fantasy football relevancy.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There is a chance. But let's kind of move on to, we talked about the running backs, move on to some of the wide receivers on this team. So you mentioned a lot of these guys having value on the team, value in terms of the points they're going to score, but maybe not trade value. And I think they kind of hit the nail on the head, because Julio Jones, he's, I think, going into his age 32 season. So that alone is going to take away a lot of value from a receiver that always finishes in the top 12, always finishes seemingly in the top 6 season upon season. Cooper Kupp, a lot of people are afraid of what he's going to be, asked to be an outside wide receiver this season, asked to work primarily from 2 wide receiver sets if they're truly going to go and be this 21 personnel team that we think that they're going to be. Adam Thielen, you can say what you want about Adam Thielen in terms of his age, but he's in line for just a boatload of targets. Probably I would pencil him in for the second most targets in the league behind Devontae Adams on that offense. And Deebo Samuel has his injury issues. DJ Chark and Darius Slayton are kind of these guys that broke out a little bit once, but we're not sure if they can do it again. So do you think that maybe it's a situation where instead of trading one of the main pieces on the team, like an Alvin Kamara, you say, screw it, kind of take the value hit a little bit and trade 2 of these wide receivers? Do you think you kind of stay as is and just kind of roll with what you've got because they're worth more to you than they would be to a potential trade partner?
I mean, I think Debo is a guy I'd look to flip because as much as I like Debo himself, he's kind of got a little bit of that hotness factor to him, right? Like he's a fun name. People like him. But if you look at the way the 49ers offense works, they're going to give the ball to whoever makes the most scheme sense that week, right? It's a very like New England Patriots type system where you can't necessarily lock into which guy it's going to be each and every week. And we know consistency is really important. So I think maybe what I do is I move Debo now because there is this perception that the injury is really not that bad, but I think it's going to keep him out longer than folks think. And then you wait until you get into the season, right? And you wait for Darius Slayton to pop off for 2 touchdowns in a big week, and then you flip him real quick. Same thing you could do with DJ Chark. You know what I mean? Like wait for him to have a big week and then flip him quick. So maybe you do like one now, one later kind of deal.
I think Debo's value didn't really take much of a hit in terms of the injury. So, and I think his value was too high to begin with because I think you really saw his ceiling last year. And I think he'll settle in as he'll hop between wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 over his career, but he's not a guy that you're going to rely on to be a wide receiver 1. So I don't think that's anything to say bad about Debo, but it's the situation we find ourselves in, and he's not a Julio Jones, Devontae Adams type of player. He's more of a wide receiver 2 type of player. You're not going to rely on him to be the lead pass catcher. So I think that's a good idea to sell Debo here if that's the route you want to go. And really you could pair Debo with Devin Singletary and upgrade quarterback and save that pick so you can get a Bryan Edwards, a T. Higgins, a Denzel Mims, though I'm not in love with his situation at this point in New York. But yeah, I mean, I think the 2 that you should be looking at selling here are Debo and DJ Chark. I am more on board with DJ Chark than I am Debo. So I think the hype around Debo from last season is the reason that I would be selling him anyway at this point because Julio Jones, Cooper Kupp, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Debo doesn't break that top 4 unless there's a bye week or an injury. So I would be selling Debo to get as much as you can out of him, and that might help you get a legit starting second QB and be the favorite to repeat.
Can I give a quick counterpoint to the DJ Chark? And I did. I thought of this just because I said flip him too, right? But the counter argument here is that there is a decent chance the Jaguars are the worst team in the NFL this year. And that means that DJ Chark could be Trevor Lawrence's wide receiver 1 next year. And I know that's a bit of projection, and I know that's a bit of playing the long game, but or maybe you know what? Maybe if you want to trade him, that's just what you tell your league mate, right?
His value is pretty high right now, but you have to expect that they're going to have to throw the ball a lot this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, if they are as bad as we think they can be, I mean, Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields is your quarterback of the future. A lot better than, I mean, no offense to Gardner Minshew, who's a good starter in his own right, but let's be realistic. Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence are entire body lengths ahead of Gardner Minshew in terms of talent.
I think I'm going to go the other way on this point with both of you guys, and it's not because I really disagree with what you said. It's just because I don't think you ever sell an injured player. I don't think you're ever going to get any type of decent return on selling an injured player. And so if I'm looking at selling Deebo Samuel right now, I'm thinking I could do that, or I could wait 6-8 weeks into the season, and when he's actually put up a few decent games, then try to sell at that point, because then you'll maximize value. Selling him now to me seems like wasted value long term, even if you don't necessarily think that he's comparable to those other wide receivers on this team. So yeah, I would probably be going with selling a running back, and for me it probably wouldn't be Kamara. For me it'd probably be Eckler, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, I just think that kind of the point you made earlier in saying that it's a situation where a lot of these guys are probably worth more to the player than they are on the trade market. Probably mostly applies to Deebo Samuel. So I'd be looking for another way out of that. But I can see where you're coming from in terms of he's the riskiest asset. Absolutely. I just think that you can capitalize on getting the timing right when it comes to that. Just like with Darius Geis, if you're looking at selling Darius Geis, you're probably not going to sell him until you get 3-4 games into the season. Todd Gurley, if you wanted to sell him last year, you wanted him to play 2 or 3 games into the season so that you had that history that people could look at and say, okay, well, this is still a player that's producing, and get top dollar for them at that point in time.
Can I just bring this full circle? So circle this back a little bit. Deebo Samuel, when it was Deebo Samuel and Bryan Edwards at South Carolina, Bryan Edwards was the guy we were more excited about. Remember when I said we wanted Bryan Edwards to come out? Like, it was because we liked his tape more than Deebo Samuel's tape. So that just came up. I had to bring that full circle.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go into tight end. Hunter Henry, Irv Smith. Irv Smith, it's projection at this point, but I think you can project him for a much improved workload from his rookie year. He's also an ultra athletic tight end, kind of H-back hybrid, so to speak. So I do think that he's going to be involved a lot in Minnesota if they're throwing the ball, if it's not going to Adam Thielen and it's somehow missed Justin Jefferson as well. But Hunter Henry is a little bit of an unknown this season because the quarterback situation is changing. Obviously, Phillip Rivers, who has targeted his tight ends pretty heavily throughout his career. I understand one of those tight ends was Antonio Gates, but again, that's neither here nor there. Looking at what Tyrod Taylor does with his tight ends, what Tyrod Taylor does with his running backs, which is kind of my Eckler point, I just see Tyrod Taylor as a quarterback that's going to look to throw it downfield more often than not. And if he can't, he's going to look to run. I do think that doesn't necessarily bode well for a guy like Hunter Henry when looking at the other targets on that team, like a Mike Williams, like a Keenan Allen, so on and so forth. Do you guys think that there's any change to be done here? Do you guys share my concern for both of these people? Or are you thinking that, hey, you know what? I kind of get what you're saying, looking at it from the Hunter Henry or Irv Smith perspective, but ultimately tight end isn't really a position that you need to supremely focus on. So I think these two guys are good enough for now.
Yeah, I would actually hold both of these guys. I caution folks from really basing their Chargers decisions on Tyrod Taylor. I really don't think Tyrod plays more than 4 games, if that. Justin Herbert was one of the most pro-ready quarterbacks coming through this year's class. For whatever flaws you may or may not have for him, I think Justin Herbert, even with all of this COVID situation happening, at most sits the first 4 games of the season. Like, that is at most. I think he's ready to take over this offense. So I'm trying to more focus on how these players look with Justin Herbert at the helm. And then Irv Smith Jr., I think, his value is ahead of him. I think he's going to rise and increase in value. And that's an offense, right? If we look at it past Thielen and Justin Jefferson, although they don't throw the ball a lot, they need that third target. And Irv Smith was brought in for a reason with a fairly high draft pick in last year's NFL draft. So I like both of these guys just fine. And with the tight end position being as crap as it is, I would hold these guys unless you get an offer that just blows you out of your mind.
Matt, really quickly before we go to Stompy, even if it is Herbert, though, isn't Herbert's strength as a quarterback a little bit more of a deep ball and kind of throwing it in the seam routes that a little bit deeper down the field than maybe you would think that a tight end would be in that situation anyway?
Yeah, I mean, Herbert definitely stretches the field well, but I think that he gets sold a little short on how good his ball placement is. And he has good ball placement at all 3 levels of the field. He really does. So I'd agree. I think Hunter Henry is just this weird, just this weird in between. He's the epitome of the tight end position where you can just kind of be whatever and be a fine play, right? So I think if you could get, a king's ransom for him, go ahead and flip him. But otherwise, just give me something solid at the tight end position and don't make me stream, for, I don't know, like Blake, don't make me get excited about Blake Jarwin. Don't make me do that.
Hey, let's not say anything about Blake Jarwin now.
His name is Jack Doyle. He's the answer to this question.
We're just gonna move on.
No, but I mean, what I would do is pick up. Like, I think you're fine. I mean, tight end premium is still like, it makes tight end more important, but not like crazy important. Where, like, yes, Kelsey and Kittle and Andrews will give you that leg up, and maybe Ertz, but anything beyond that, it's just like, I mean, Darren Fells was almost a tight end 1 last season. Jason Witten was a tight end 1 last season. So, I mean, if anything, I agree. I would stick and then just maybe try and get a guy that is kind of low in terms of value, but you can tell yourself a narrative where they do get some sort of targets. Ryan Griffin is one, or even Chris Herndon, really, in that offense. I would rather have Chris Herndon. I mean, listen, I get it with an Aton. I get it, but it's Jack Doyle. Like, he's the only tight end there that's going to catch anything. Right. And T.Y. Hilton is not a guy that you can necessarily trust in terms of health. Michael Pittman's a rookie wide receiver who is somebody that they need in terms of that type of wide receiver, but you're not trusting him. Jack Doyle's been in this offense now this is his 3rd season. So I think that he's going to get, I mean, maybe not 80
Jack
plus
Doyle
targets, but
his own
60 to 70.
issues.
Well, no,
He's
and that's fine, but you're not, it's not like you're spending anything that's worthwhile to get him. It's more of a get somebody that could you could tell yourself has a tight end 1 type of season in them. Chris Herndon. I can tell myself a story that Jack Doyle can get there, but I'm not banking on it. But you also have, like, with the tight end position the way it's built, I would rather just rotate like 3 guys through the best matchups. So I would grab a guy who's low on value, but has proven that he can put up wide or tight end 1 weeks every once in a while.
Yeah, it's I mean, honestly, like, I think tight end 1, the definition of tight end 1 needs to be changed. I don't think
give me 7 points from the tight end position with
these
running backs right now. I'm like, all right, just give me 7 points. I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at. Once you're out of the top 6 tight ends, it's really a cluster at this point. So for me, I do understand where you're coming from, Snoppy, as well, and that's kind of what I would do. I talked about some insecurities with these tight ends to begin with. So for me, I'd be looking to sell one in a tight end premium because I think you'll get more from that, and then look to bring in an Eric Ebron or Blake Jarwin, or if your name is Sam and Jack Doyle, just somebody that's going to kind of hold you over and have that other guy to be a little bit more solid for you, but probably come out ahead when it comes to total value from selling one of these guys. So that's what I'd look to do. But man, this is a great team. This is an awesome team. I'm going to go ahead and start to round out this podcast. Matt, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on board. Go ahead and let the people know where to find you, what you got going on.
Hey, we forgot to break down the team.
Yeah,
he's a Lamborghini. He's a Lamborghini with a 4-cylinder engine, right?
Yeah, now. We're not. Yeah, there's no point. It's a spaceship. It's the same.
Let me have my fun, okay, Akon?
I know this fine. Is the only fun you have every week. I know. I'm sorry. But we're going to go into, again, Matt, let us know where you're from, what you got going on, so on and so forth.
Yeah, guys, this was a blast. I appreciate you having me on here. So I got a few big projects going on right now. The big one, I just launched it about a couple months ago, is the Patreon, and it's been a super successful, super enjoyable experience here for me so far. I got a lot on there for both Dynasty and Devy players. So I have my Dynasty rankings. I give personalized Dynasty advice on there. in terms of folks, if you were getting excited as I was talking about Devy, the big thing that I just dropped is my next level Devy rankings, 330 Devy players deep, whether you're playing campus to Canton, Devy fantasy football, college fantasy football. All of those players are in there and evaluated for those different player values. And actually, all 330 of those players also have full player descriptions. And the 2021 eligible players that I've done tape reviews on, which is about 60 guys so far, they all have rookie draft projections and then also NFL draft projections in there. So there's a whole lot going on there. I do a weekly podcast just for my patrons, as well as full 2020 season projection. So a lot of good stuff going on there. That's patreon.com/the FF Educator. And then, as always, Dynasty Draft Room podcast. We do 3 podcast episodes a week: NFL Draft, Devy, and Dynasty Fantasy Football. So those are the big ones. I push out all my work on Twitter at the FF_educator. And, I think that's a decent summary of all the content I got going out.
All right, Sam, what about our Patreon and the store and the rest of it?
Yeah, those exist. That's all I got.
Cool. So people
I'm joking. Go to patreon.com/Dino Diagnostic. The first tier, I believe you get access to the video podcasts. You get access to a chat as well, and it just goes up from there. I just sent out a shirt for one of our patrons the other day. So just come support us, and if you enjoy our work, we really appreciate it. I mean, we enjoy this anyway, but it would be nice to have that monetize a little bit, right, Eitan? And then go to storeenvy.com, and I think it's /FF Pod Shirts, but just search FF Pod Shirts. That's Dynasty Outhouse's memorabilia, I suppose, store for podcasts. So Trade Addicts is on there, Superflex Super Show, us. There's a few more as well that I don't remember, but there's shirts, there's mugs, there's stickers, there's hoodies. So you're supporting your favorite podcasts, but you also donate 10%, or you also donate to Fantasy Cares, as 10% of the proceeds go to Fantasy Cares. So support us, donate to a good cause. storeenvy.com, search FF Pod Shirts.
Thank you so much for joining us at the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep with us next week to go ahead and make sure that your maintenance stays up to date. Again, my name is Eitan Mozia. You can find me on Twitter at Eitan Mozia. You can find Sam at Stompy the Bear. See you guys next week.